For those of you who don't know me, I'm Freda Johnson from Volunteer Engagement. Thank you all for coming to, I believe, our 5th author series, and it's a pretty special one. All of them are special. This is special because our 2 editors of this book, our 2 authors, are connected to us in a very deep and wonderful way. Rocky Lang, his mother Monica Lang, who many of you may know, lived here. And Barbara Hall was a volunteer for us as well. So thank you for coming, and I'm going to give them the microphone so they can tell you a little bit about their background and then on to the process of the book.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be back on campus. As I was driving up here, I've been back a couple of times, but every time I come back here, it's a little, it's a little bittersweet. I love the campus, and I drive by where my mom was, and it's emotional for me. But the family here, it continues to be my family, even though she's no longer residing here, and thank you for that. Anyway, so getting to this book, 3 years ago, a letter came to me from the Academy. Seeing Danny smiling, I love that. A letter came to me from the Academy, and it was a surprise to me because I didn't expect a letter from the Academy and the Directors Guild. And I opened it up, and it was from a man named Howard Prouty, who was the acquisitions archivist for the Margaret Herrick Library. And the letter said, "Dear Rocky, you won't remember me, but I was the assistant librarian when you were a directing fellow in 1980. And now I'm at the Margaret Herrick Library, and I found something that might be of interest to you." So I turned the page, and in front of me is a letter dated 1939 from my father, 24 years old, off the bus from Brooklyn, from Bensonhurst, $50 in his pocket, and he writes this letter to H.N. Swanson. And most of you, I'm sure, know who Swanee was, great literary agent, and my dad was looking for a job. So what was contained in this letter was really who my father was as an adult, who I got to know as his child. It showed his ballsiness, it showed his humor, it shows what he wanted in his life, and it was all contained in this one-page letter, which literally blew me away. So I called Howard and thanked him and asked him to lunch, and after lunch he took me to the Herrick Library and showed me the archives. And number 2, blown away. On the way home, I called my agent and I said I want to do a book called Letters from Hollywood. And as many of you who have been in the business, a good idea is only a good idea until its execution. And then I got home and said, holy shit, now how am I going to make this work? So I called Howard back and told him I need somebody who knows where the bodies are buried. And that's when I was introduced to the great Barbara Hall, who is really quite an amazing person. She's a historian, an archivist. She knows where everything is. And the 2 of us sort of used our talents and embarked on this 3-year journey that is the result here is in this book called Letters from Hollywood. And without any further introduction, I'll let Barbara tell you a little bit more about herself. Hi, Michael. And about herself, and then we can get into more of the program.
Should we sit down?
Sure.
The cup down there.
Here we go. We're doing the Johnny Carson, guys.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Here we go. This one can go over there. Hi. So I was very happy to get that call from Howard. Well, first an email from Howard, and then email from Rocky. I had worked for quite a few years at the Academy's library, actually over 20 years in the archives, as both an archivist, working with special collections materials like letters and scripts and production materials, but also as an oral history interviewer. And in fact, the very first time that I was here at this campus was many years ago, over 20 years ago, when I was here doing an oral history with the great assistant to Alfred Hitchcock, Peggy Robertson. And I came, probably about 10 to 12 times to do interviews with her in her room. She was in the hospital at that time. And so that was my first introduction to this wonderful place. So I've been aware of it ever since. So Rocky contacted me, and I already had some ideas right away of letters that would be great for the book. But as he said, it also involved doing a tremendous amount of research. not just at the Academy's library, which does have amazing collections, but also at USC, UCLA, the American Film Institute, University of Texas, and also reaching out to archives that we weren't able to travel to and asking them to help us. And I knew from being in the field that there are few people out in the world that are more interested in helping than librarians and archivists. So we reached out to those people. They helped us find things as well. And one of the things that really is exciting to me about this book is that it's shining a light on archives and on the work that is done at archives to preserve the history of our industry. Because a lot of people don't realize just how much amazing material is housed in these collections. So that was a fun part of it as well. So we just started working on research, compiling many, many, many letters, and then trying to sort of edit them, curate them into a collection that we thought would say something about Hollywood, about filmmaking in Hollywood, about living and working in Hollywood, about the relationships between people in Hollywood. So that was sort of how we got started.
So that was just part of the journey. The other part of the journey, I'm a little better standing up, the other part of the journey was finding these letter writers, because I was quickly informed that the copyright is with the letter writer, not the receiver. So that became this whole other journey. Is we were looking for letters, we were also looking for people. And that involved a private investigator. It involved a lot of very interesting stories. And one of the great benefits that I didn't expect out of this is the personal connection I made to the people, the sons and the daughters, the grandchildren of the icons. These people like myself who grew up in the shadows of giants in the industry. And there was this amazing fraternity and this sort of like understanding of each other that brought us together. And I now have many, many friends, some sitting in this room today who you will hear from, that I would never have met if it hadn't been for this project. And that has enriched my life. And so that's sort of the nuts and bolts of getting to the project. And we'd like to introduce a couple of people to read some letters, and then we'll take some questions. And you ready for that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first person I would like to bring up, and then Barbara will give you some context to the letter, is that along the way, Barbara came to me with a letter she found from Gilbert Rowland to Clara Bow. And this is an incredible letter. It's a tender, loving reminiscence of a time gone by. And again, Barbara will give you a little bit more context to it. And I couldn't find Gilbert Rowland's daughter. It was like impossible. I had used all these search engines and things insurance people used, and I couldn't find her. So I finally turned to a private investigator. And he called me back in 10 minutes. He said, "Oh, she was 10 minutes from you." So I contacted Jill Rowland, and I sent her the letter, and she called me up, and she said, yes, I understood my father had this relationship with Clara Bow before I was born. He married my mother, and I like your project very much, but I need to see you face to face. And I was wondering, okay, so why does she need to see me face to face? So I read this letter over, I'm not sure about it. I agree to meet her. So we meet at a place called Patty's in Toluca Lake. Would you like to stand up?
Sure.
And before I met her, I contacted a writer named David Sten, who had written a book called Running Wild, which was the biography of Clara Bow, one of the biographies of Clara Bow. And I said, why does she want to meet me? He said, she's going to want to know if your dad was shot in the balls. I said, what? Kidding me? So he then informed me, and many of you who don't know the story in brief, is my father had an affair with Joan Bennett, and Joan Bennett's husband, Walter Wanger, tried to shoot him in the balls, and it became the scandal story of the 50s. He missed, or I wouldn't be here speaking to you today. But anyway, that was the scandal. So David said she's going to want to know about that. So Jill and I meet, and we have some pleasantries, and lo and behold, it gets around to the story, and where she asked me about the incident. And the reason why she asked me about the incident is that it really, really upset the Wanger and the Bennett household. And Joan Bennett is Jill Rowland's aunt, because her father is Gilbert Rowland, and her aunt was Joan Bennett, right?
Mother was Constance.
Mother was Constance Bennett. And so that was the connection. So with that, so happy I met Jill, because now we're friends. And I would like to bring Barbara up, and she'll give some little context to the letter, and then Jill can read it.
Okay, great. So, did you want to sit and read, or, yeah? I'll sit here. I found this letter at the Academy's Margaret Herrick Library in a group of materials that were donated to the library by Clara Bow's family, by her sons. And I just thought it was a beautiful letter that really showed what a lovely person Gilbert Rowland was, and what a beautiful relationship the two of them had. The backstory is that Clara Bow this is written in 1949, is that right? Yeah, I think that's right. Clara Bow had suffered from a lot of mental issues all through her life, and at the time when she had retired from pictures in the early 30s, as I'm sure a lot of you know, after being one of the biggest, if not the biggest, movie star in the world. And she had married an actor turned politician named Rex Bell, and sort of retired from pictures. But at the time that Gilbert Rowland wrote this letter to her, she was in a psychiatric institution in Connecticut, being treated for mental illness issues. And so that's the context on the letter.
Well, as most of you know, Clara Bow was known as the It Girl, right? Anyway, here's the letter. I don't know if that's just fine. Sure. Hello, Clarita girl. How happy I was to hear from you. I wrote you and Rex from Tucson, Arizona. We were filming The Furies with Barbara Stanwyck. I might do The Crisis at Metro next month with Cary Grant, if terms can be arranged. You tell me you long for your boys and for California. I share your feelings. My daughters are with their mother in Wiesbaden, Germany, and there's nothing I can do except cry a little once in a while. They were showing some of your pictures around in the silent theaters. I hope someday they will show Plastic Age. Wow. It would be wonderful to see that dancing scene, you and I get into a fight with Donald Keith and knock him out, and the police are breaking down the doors of the speakeasy, and I rescue Don from the claws of the law. It would be pleasant seeing how I looked when I was your beau, and you were my dream girl. It would be pleasant seeing that, and then it might be very beautiful, and suddenly it might be very sad. Turn backward, O time, in thy flight. I hope the treatments will alleviate your illness, and you can be with your boys and Rex soon, and that you are happy. I will go to church and pray for that. How is your dad? I would like to see him. I always had a warm spot in my heart for him, even though many years ago he refused to let me marry you because I was making $75 a week, and you $300, and then I made $300, you made $1,000, and then I made $1,000, you made more, ad infinitum. And so it goes, and that's the way it is. And give Rex my best, and your boys. I'm going to Texas to see my old school teacher. She is old and lonely.
Thank you. I think that's is so beautiful that we've been able to bring the voices back of the contributors' parents. I think many of them were affected the way that I was when they heard the words of their families, their loved ones, through their letters, because we don't get that anymore today. The next person, should we bring Danny up?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. The next person is Danny Selznick. And I don't know what to say about Danny other than Danny's known me like my whole life, pretty much. He knew my dad, and I love him, and I love to go to the deli with him and get him herring and sour cream and talk about movies. And it's just a delight to have you part of our project. You've been supportive from day one.
So, I know, I can find it. So, so great to have you here to read this. So of course I wanted to include David O. Selznick in the book. There are certain people that I just absolutely had to have in the book, and of course David O. Selznick is one of them. But it was challenging, because so much has been written about him, and there's an entire huge book by the great Rudy Belmer called Memo from David O. Selznick that collects together hundreds of his memos that he wrote over the years, and also that your dad wrote extremely long memos usually, and we weren't going to be able to put a lot of other letters in here if we put in some David O. Selznick memos. So I was at Warner Brothers, at the Warner Brothers archive at USC, and I was going through material on Casablanca, which is not a movie produced by David O. Selznick. But I found a telegram from Danny's dad to the great producer Hal Wallace at Warner Brothers, and it was about not one of Selznick's films, but about Casablanca. And that is the piece that we chose to put in the book. So now Danny will read it for you.
Well, I guess we should mention the fact that my father brought Ingrid Bergman over from Sweden and developed a very, I think to be candid, a very possessive relationship with her. And I had the privilege of having her visiting our house for many years. And then when I spent a year in Europe and she was married to Roberto Rossellini, she invited me to come down and spend 2 weeks with her and Roberto in Rome, which was wonderful. And I think it was very clear that as I got to know Ingrid, she talked about how she felt my father was extremely possessive about her, and so thrilled that he arranged for her to play in For Whom the Bell Tolls with Gary Cooper. And of course, her first picture in America was Intermezzo, which is a remake of a film she'd made in Sweden. I think I must have been 3 years old when she was brought to our house, and she seemed to be extremely tall, and rather, I wouldn't say muscular, but she was a really strong-looking woman, and with a gorgeous smile, and she wore almost no makeup. And I love the story of her being brought. My father had seen the Swedish Intermezzo and arranged to bring her over, and she came to his office in Culver City. And apparently he said to me, "Miss Bergman, would you mind removing your shoes?" Because she was quite tall. And she said, "Mr. Selznick, I'll remove my shoes, but it won't make much difference. They're just sandals." And she really was, I guess, 5 feet 9.5 inches. So I'm now completing a book of my own about my childhood, which is taking me far too many years to complete, but I'm pleased that almost everyone in it is now dead, so I won't have to hear complaints from people that they've been inappropriately described. But I think my years at Universal as an executive in the 11th floor tower, Universal City, were completely unique for me. I had never worked at a film studio. And Jennings Lang was, when he just walked through the 11th floor, he must have been 6'4" at least, and had this magnetic smile, and just everybody who interfaced with him seemed to be crazy about him. I mean, the word irresistible is too often used, but he really was irresistible. And I was so pleased when I moved in here 3.5 years ago that Monica Lewis who some of you must remember, who was Jennings' wife and Rocky's mother, was so pleased to see me. I had scarcely remembered her because she didn't show up at the studio that often. But Jennings was really, had so much personal magnetism that he absolutely could have been a film star. And I think Rocky's inherited a great deal of that magnetism. And I think the whole idea of this book is so exciting. When you read through the pages, it just, you know, the selections are so shrewdly picked, and the comment with each letter is so thoughtfully presented. And it's wonderful that he's come out here to visit us and have Jill and myself, you know, read from the book. I mean, I've got the page open to David O. Selznick to Hal Wallace, November 12, 1962. 1942. So I will read it, okay? Dear Hal, saw Casablanca last night. Think it's a swell movie. And an all-around fine job of picture making. Told Jack, that's Jack Warner obviously, told Jack as forcibly as I could that I thought it would be a terrible mistake to change the ending. And also, that I thought the picture ought to be rushed out. Knowing what they started with, I think the firm of Epstein, and Koch did an expert piece of writing, even though Nick's philosophy is in at least one instance, word for word, that of Rhett Butler. My father feeling rather possessive about Rhett Butler. I have a few minor suggestions to make. I love that phrase, I have a few minor suggestions to make. This is a phrase that I heard throughout my childhood. I have a few minor suggestions to make. And if by any chance you would care to have them, I will be glad to pass them along. That's what I would like to say is my father's false modesty. There wasn't a lot of modesty in him, but he was so gregarious and charming that he could get away with a phrase like that. Although I am sure that you will find out these things for yourself at preview. Mike Curtiz's direction was, as always, splendid. He is clearly one of the most competent men in the business, and I am most grateful to you and to Mike Curtiz for the superb handling of Ingrid. Of course, David felt very possessive about Ingrid. Thanks to you two, and of course to Ingrid, the part seems much better than it actually is. And I think it will be a benefit to her, and therefore, of course, to me. I am also grateful on Ingrid's behalf and my own for Arthur Adelson's superb photography of Ingrid. But then the job of photography of the whole picture is excellent, and is no small extent, and to no small extent, responsible for the picture's mood. After For Whom the Bell Tolls, needless to say, another film that my father arranged for Ingrid, one of the great stars of the world. Ingrid is obviously going to be what I have for so long predicted, one of the great stars of the world. Nothing the matter with thinking big. The demand for her services is, of course, tremendous. In deciding who should have outside pictures with her in the future, and should you and Mike have a really important vehicle for her, the way in which you have kept your promises in regard to her is going to bring you the dividend of special consideration. Cordially and sincerely yours, David O. Selznick.
I love hearing this stuff. This is great. The next person I want to introduce, I have a very interesting sort of sharing of bedrooms with, and that is Michael Berman is come up to the campus today, and Michael is the son of Pandro Berman. And it turned out that my father bought the house that I grew up in from his father. And Michael grew up in my bedroom probably 20 years before I was born. And he went to the same school I went to, and he sat in the same movie screening room that I saw at the house. And we connected through this book, and it was just another great friendship has developed with Michael, and he would please come up and read his father's letter. And Barbara will set the table on that one.
Yeah. Hi.
Thanks, Michael, for coming.
Well, I was very excited to find a wonderful letter from Pandro Berman at the Academy Library that we could use in the book. I've told Michael that I remember seeing his father speak at USC when I was a student there many years ago, when I was taking a class on the history of RKO taught by the great professor Rick Jewell, who has written several books about RKO. And so I had a memory of seeing Pandro and learning from Rick how crucial he was to the history of RKO and to the great films that they made in the 1930s. So I was really excited to find a letter that touched specifically on the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers films at RKO in the 30s that Michael's dad produced. Did you want to say anything else? I'll find the letter for you.
Oh, thanks. Well, first of all, I didn't know Rocky all these years that he was living in my bedroom in our house, and seeing movies in the projection room where I used to see them. And so it was really great to meet him and talk about stories and things that went on there. Dad had this strange sense of humor and a kind of aggressive talent for twisting people's arms without them feeling any pain. I don't know how he did it, but he made, this letter was about the Astaire and Rogers movies, specifically to a director named Mark Sandrich, who directed 3 of them. Mark had apparently said something to Ginger's mother, Layla Rogers, that she didn't take the right way. What he said, in essence, was, well, first of all, Ginger was, a product, she was learning to sing and dance in the beginning and getting better. And Mark said to Layla, if she wants to have a really long, extended career, she's going to have to learn to dance a little better. Now, he didn't mean it in any, he thought, listen, the world loved Ginger Rogers. Fred was not a hit in those movies till about the 5th or 6th one. And I asked my dad about it. He said, well, nobody watches the man in a couple dance. They all watch the woman. But after about the 5th or 6th movie, they began to realize that Fred was a real good dancer. Fred and Ginger looked great together, especially in the later movies. But Ginger was never my favorite partner. I liked Eleanor Powell. She was a tap dancer, an extraordinary tap dancer. And they moved together like one. They were in Broadway Melody of 1940, and it was sensational. I have a tape of it's just fantastic, the way they danced together. But Ginger certainly danced well enough to be the star she was. Everybody loved her. And he didn't really, Mark Sanders didn't really mean to say anything disparaging about her. He was trying to encourage her to improve. And Layla went to Ginger, and Ginger called my dad up on Friday and said, that's it, I'm done, I'm not coming to work Monday. Well, that means the bank stopped loaning money, everything stops, all this money is down the drain that's already been spent in pre-production scripts and whatever. And somehow Dad was able to talk her into coming back. But he wanted to make sure that everything was smoothed over with Mark Sandrich, the director. So he wrote this letter And I think if you'll hold this for me.
Sure.
Yes, okay. This was a letter written April 21st, 1930.
38.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't bring the right glasses. Dear Mark, yeah, that would be 38, of course. Dear Mark, after a great deal of difficulty, the studio has persuaded Ginger Rogers to return to work tomorrow morning. Strangely enough, the major reason, in spite of what you may have heard to the contrary, for her reluctance to report for this picture has been her aggravation at the fact that she is being asked to work under your direction. This is not because she has ever had or has now any feeling insofar as your abilities are concerned as a director, or insofar as you are concerned as a person, except that you have undoubtedly been guilty of certain acts which have caused her great anguish.
Do you want me to take over the
I
reading?
really do, I'm sorry, I just
That's
had,
okay.
I didn't bring my reading glasses and I
That's okay.
just don't have.
You must realize that Ginger Rogers, like every other actress, is a person who will respond most completely to careful attention and generous pampering, and you have made certain statements to her and to her mother with regard to her, which may have been meant in the best of faith, but which antagonized her to extreme. I refer specifically to a conversation you had with Leela, in which you told Leela that if Ginger did not learn to improve her singing and dancing, she would at some future date find herself in great difficulties in the picture business. I refer also to the numerous times in which Ginger has been made to feel that she is of considerably less importance to any given picture than Fred Astaire. This feeling can be transmitted in many ways, but mostly in your attitude toward the two people. Ginger has every right to believe that she is as valuable and as important to RKO and to the picture as any other person in the setup. And when she is sometimes made to feel that her opinions, her clothes, her dancing, and her parts are to be given less consideration than those of any other member of the cast, she naturally reacts as a woman, and an actress is bound to react. More flies are killed with honey than with swatters, and I think you should make it your business on the company's behalf on this production, now that she has consented to go ahead with it, to make her feel that she is getting the complete respect of the organization from top to bottom, and that she is being given as careful attention and treatment as is humanly possible for the company, the producer, and the director to give to her. It would be impossible to detail all the little points of grievances that Ginger has had. But for example, just to show you the kind of thing that has aggravated her, when the rumpus was aroused over your reported interview in London, it seems that you went to some pains to correct the false impression that had been created in Astaire's mind as to what your words had been. But at that time, you ignored Ginger completely and made no attempt to make her feel that you had not said what it was reported you had said. These may seem like very minor things, but they are important to the person concerned, and I think it is only fair of me, for both your sake and hers, that I give you now this review of what may have been in her mind, so that you will know how to approach the situation on this picture so as to promote harmony in the unit, rather than let any slight thing occur which might make Ginger feel that the company was not living up to its promise to treat her with the utmost consideration. Let me assure you that I'm very sincere when I say that consideration from all of us has been her main issue in the series of discussions, and it seems wrong to me that any business which is so dependent on so few outstanding personalities should fail to give that consideration which is so cheap to give and so important to receive. Don't take this in the nature of a criticism of you, because as I said before, you may have been entirely unconscious of many of your actions, and you undoubtedly were only for Ginger's interests in your discussions, but has not had a happy effect, and I'm sure you would want to know about it rather than have any false impressions. You must know, for example, how important it is to a girl that great interest be taken in what she wears and how she looks, and how a few kind words on this subject can often make a person break their neck to accomplish something you wish in return. Best regards, sincerely, Pan.
That's great.
Very diplomatic. His big problem in all the Astaire and Rogers movies was getting the great Tin Pan Alley composers to write music for it. Because in those days, they thought it was only for Broadway. Doing movies was a step down. They didn't want to do it. And those were his great concerns, because he knew people weren't going to those movies to see the story. They were all the same story. Boy meets girl, romance, boy loses girl, get back together at the end for a Hollywood ending. Nobody cared about the stories. They wanted to hear the music and see the dancing. It was the dark days of the Depression. People wanted, there wasn't much cheer. And they wanted to feel good for an hour or two, and they went to those movies. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
That's okay.
Michael, thank you so much.
I'm happy to read it. And, this is, Rocky and I talk about having worked on this book for 3 years, which does sound like kind of a long time, but I'm amazed that we got it done as quickly as we did, because imagine every single letter brings up all these amazing stories, and I could find myself really going down the rabbit hole with each of these letters, trying to trace, trying to figure out what the historical context is, and what the story is behind each letter.
And there are just with all the stories, the letters we have, 137, just think of all the letters that are not in the book. We had a very hard time because we wanted to try to have one person be represented by one letter. And in most cases that worked. But even when I went to the Library of Congress or the Kennedy Library or Boston, Barbara provided me with a sort of a treasure map of where to go and look for things. And one of the great experiences I have is looking through the Hemingway Dietrich love letters that 30 years of an unconsummated love affair that are at the Kennedy Library, and bringing back that letter, those collections, and then trying to find out which one we're going to use. And it was just an immense operation, and I think we're both really glad that we're done. And yet we had a great time. We're enjoying people are responding to the book.
One of the collections that I really was familiar with at the Academy that has a lot of great material in it is the Hedda Hopper collection.
Oh my God!
And I'm sure.
Let me tell the setup on that, though.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I had found several letters in the Hedda Hopper collection, both letters from her and letters to her, that we were interested in using in the book. And then Rocky started to trace the family.
So one of the sort of the journeys that I went on was not only trying to find a lot of these people, is sometimes they changed their names, or they had children, grandchildren who got married or whatever, and they just were sort of like off the map. And I was looking through wills and estates and in bottoms of archives that had nothing to do with film. They just said they were legal archives, civil cases. And so in the case of Hedda, again, I struck out and called our guy David Gervitz, our PI, and he found Hedda Hopper's granddaughter in a civil case up north. And this letter, are you going to read the letter?
Well, which one do you think?
I was going to have you read the one that's Citizen Kane letter. Do you want to read that?
Sure,
Okay.
I can do that one.
All right, so Barbara shows me this letter, and it's and I'm not going to give it away, but it's very critical of Citizen Kane, and now we have this 2020 vision going backwards of what would happen with the movie. And so when I finally found her granddaughter, and I was nervous about sending this letter to her, and she read the letter and she said, "Oh my God, my grandmother was such a kook. Of course you can use this letter." And so with that, Barbara can read the letter.
Yes, so the first part of the letter actually relates to Jill, because it has two. She's writing the letter to. She's writing to a friend of hers, an actress, as some of you may remember, named Eileen Pringle. And in the first part of the letter, she's talking about someone who has the nickname Dick B, but it's Barbara Bennett. So it's another one of your aunts, right? So another one of the Bennett sisters. So the first part, when she talks about Dick B, apparently she's referring to Barbara Bennett. And the second part of the letter is about Citizen Kane. January 27th, 1941. My dear Pringy, thanks so much for your note and the latest information about Dick B. Yes, Ad Randall has the inside track, and of course he hasn't a dime, not even to bless himself with. She's such a fool, but then she always was. But isn't it a wicked shame that 5 children have been brought into the world and have that kind of a girl for their mother? However, maybe things will be patched up, but it will be a cat and dog life if it ever is. I'm surprised there was nothing in that rumor about Paley and Brooke, William S. Paley and Louise Brooks. It was current all over Hollywood. I wish you could find out who he is attentive to. It would be mighty interesting. The town is so excited over the Orson Welles Citizen Kane, and it's being based on the life of Mr. Hearst. They talk about nothing else. I've seen the picture, and it's foul. It doesn't leave Mr. Hearst with one redeeming feature. Nobody but Orson would have dared do a thing like that. And I personally hope it will never be shown on the screen. Although they're going right ahead making plans for its release in February. But don't miss the opening. You may not have another chance to see it, because if they do open it, it may be stopped after the first night. It's a foul thing to have done, and if it's successful, it will only be because of the publicity his enemies give him, which will attract people to the box office. Do write again soon and tell me any news you have. I love having letters from you, and I love you very much, Pringy. I hope one of these days you get the job and the chance that you deserve. God knows you've worked hard enough for it. Bless you always, Hedda.
I think when we met Joan Pete, her granddaughter, who came down for our event to kick off the movie, we were both so delighted with her, and she had such an interesting perspective of her grandmother, both in dispelling the rumors of the mythology around what a horrible person she was, and at the same time validating a lot of those things we've heard about Hedda. I did ask her if the Luella Parsons rivalry with Hedda was as real as the press has made it out to be, and she said it was as far as Luella towards Hedda, but not Hedda towards Luella, because Luella was there first, and she was Hearst's girl. And when Hedda came on the scene, Hearst loved Hedda personally. She was more gregarious. They had a lot more in common personally, and so Luella always had that. And one of the things that she said is Hedda had predeceased Luella by a small amount, and someone had said to Luella, who's also on her deathbed, and they said, we want you to know that Hedda Hopper had passed, and Luella sort of like woke up out of her semi-coma and said, good. And so anyway, this is good stories.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, Rocky mentioned that one of the things we did with the book was we made the decision early on, even though in some cases we had multiple fantastic letters from the same person, we decided we were only going to have one letter from each person in the book. That way we could cover, we could have 135 people in the book and not just focus on a few letter writers. But we had to make a couple of exceptions, and Hedda Hopper was an exception to that rule because we had found the Citizen Kane letter, and Rocky loved that very much, and we were going forward with that. And then I was doing some research in Katharine Hepburn's collection, and I found a signed letter from Hedda from much later in both their lives, December 2nd, 1964. And I loved the letter from Hedda so much, and I loved Katharine Hepburn's response so much, that we decided that we would put both another letter from Hedda Hopper in the book. And if you like, I'll read this one for you too. They're not very long. The backstory, only backstory you need to know is that Hedda Hopper had been very, very hard on Katharine Hepburn at certain points in her career, especially in the late 40s and 50s during the Blacklist era, and she had, called Katharine Hepburn a red and all of this stuff. My dear Katharine, I've been meaning to write you for a long time, but when this photograph came in yesterday, I thought, what the hell? You might like to see how beautiful you look, even without makeup and a dirty face. Both you and Bogey were so wonderful in the picture. African queen, of course. I don't know why we can't be friends. Perhaps you do, but I'd like to be able to call you up once in a while and say hello and perhaps reminisce a bit, and promise not to put a word of it in the column. I have always admired you and think it's a crime that you're not acting. We have no one fit to kiss your feet. You have a gaiety, a gallantry, a gentlemanly way of expressing yourself that no other dame in this town had, not even Garbo. As I grow older, I've mellowed and think of days gone by instead of the trash they're putting out in the name of motion pictures today. You were a big part of that era, and I miss you. Yours, Hedda. And Katharine Hepburn wrote back a couple days later, and this is a draft that was from from Hepburn's collection. Dear Hedda, that's a wonderful picture of old Bogey and me. Wasn't it great that he won that fool thing, the Oscar? He was the one person I knew who said, I should win it. I'm going to try and win it. He and Bet planned the party before the outcome was in any way certain, not afraid of being thought a fool. Also, he loved being an actor. Thought he was a damned good one, too, and was as proud of his profession as a wonderful furniture maker or silversmith. In Africa, every week or so, he'd come to me. You happy? Got everything you need? Room comfortable? He really was a gent, a well-mannered, gentle fellow. You and I are friends, Hedda. Time has seen to that. You have survived, I have survived, and so there is a natural admiration. Not of your politics, not of your profession, but of you, and your stride and your looks and capacity to get on with it, your character, on your own terms. And that, I think, is what you admire in me. As my father said about Dulles, I disagree with almost everything he says, but by gum, the old boy has guts. Your letter was very flattering, too much, but I enjoyed reading it. Kath. Any other questions or comments? Yeah?
I had a question. How difficult was it to clear these letters? And did anybody ask for money?
In every case, with the exception of a couple, people were delighted to participate. Only one person asked for money, and that was Orson Welles' daughter, Beatrice. And we said no because it was unfair to give her money when we didn't give anybody else. And that was sort of a rule that we had from the very beginning. And it was not that kind of a project. Barbara and I made very little money on the project. We just weren't gonna do that. And so she asked for money. There are a handful of people, a couple, maybe a few people who said no for sort of odd reasons. But most everybody said yes. It was people were so willing to be helpful, and they responded so well. And now that they're seeing the book, they're even more excited because they're actually seeing the letter in this form and not just in a carbon or a copy. So all right, well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And books are available, and we'll sign them for you.
There are refreshments back there, there's signing of books, and if you have any more questions, both Rocky and Barbara would be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.